The air in the boardroom is thin and cold, stolen from the lungs of the 20 people staring at me. It smells of expensive leather, stale coffee, and fear. My fear. There's two, though they don't know it yet. Mark stands at the head of the polished mahogany table, a king in his court. His suit is a shade of blue so dark it's almost black, tailored to perfection. He looks like the man on the cover of the magazines they write about him in. Visionary. Innovator. Genius. He doesn't look like the man who shared a cramped, one-bedroom apartment with me, whispering his dreams into the curve of my neck while I paid the rent. He's just finished his grand presentation. Projections on the wall show hockey stick graphs, soaring profits, a planned acquisition that will make them all titans of industry. The room is buzzing with triumph. They are about to vote on the final stage of the merger. It's a formality. He has them all in the palm of his hand. All except me. I am the ghost at this feast. The inconvenient ex-wife with a minority share he's been trying to buy out for 6 months with insulting, lowball offers delivered by lawyers with cruel, thin smiles. He thinks I'm here to plead, to make a scene, to be the emotional woman he always painted me as when he needed to dismiss me. He smiles at me, a tight, condescending little twitch of his lips. It's the smile he gives to a waitress he's about to undertip. "Clara," he says, his voice smooth as scotch. "We've been over this. The offer is final. This isn't the time or the place." I look at him. I really look at him. I see the fine lines of stress around his eyes that weren't there a year ago. I see the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. He's not a titan. He's just a man in a cage he built for himself, and he's mistaken me for one of the bars. My heart is a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel sadness. I feel a strange, terrifying calm. I practiced this in the mirror 100 times, but my voice still feels like it belongs to someone else when it comes out. "I'm not here to discuss your offer, Mark." I let the words hang in the silent room. The board members shift in their seats. They look from him to me, their curiosity piqued. This is not the script they were expecting. "I'm here to inform the board," I continue, my gaze sweeping over their confused faces before landing back on my husband. My ex-husband. That effective immediately, I am pulling my shares. A nervous chuckle ripples through the room. One of the older men, a venture capitalist named Sterling, leans forward. "Ms. Vance, Clara, with all due respect, your shares are foundational, but they can't stop this merger. We'll simply buy you out post-vote." Mark's condescending smile widens. He's relieved. He thinks I've just made a fool of myself. He thinks I don't understand how this works. But he's the one who doesn't understand. He never did. He forgot about the woman who read every line of every document before sinking her entire inheritance, her entire future, into his dream. I slide a single piece of paper across the table. It glides over the polished surface and stops right in front of him. My lawyer called it the Armageddon clause. I just called it the just-in-case clause when we signed it all those years ago. A little piece of paper he was too excited, too arrogant, too blinded by the sight of my life savings to ever read properly. "You're right, Mr. Sterling," I say, my voice steady. "My shares alone aren't enough. But my shares, as per Section 4, subparagraph B of the initial capital investment agreement, constitute a majority voting bloc. They represent 51% of the company's voting power. I am the majority shareholder, and I do not consent to this merger." Silence. Not just a lack of noise. A deep, profound vacuum that sucks the air out of the room. The color drains from Mark's face. His perfect, confident posture dissolves. He stares at the paper, then at me. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. His eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with what I thought was love, are wide with pure, unadulterated panic. He sees it now. He finally sees it. I wasn't the foundation he built his empire on. I was the kill switch. He makes a strange sound, a gasp, a choke. His hand goes to his chest. His knees buckle. And as the men in expensive suits leap to their feet, shouting his name, my husband, the visionary, the genius, collapses onto the cold, hard floor. And I'd just stand there, watching the empire fall. If you've ever felt the ground crumble beneath your feet, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It means more than you can possibly imagine. It started with a dream. Not even my dream, really. It was Mark's. But he had a way of making his dreams feel like they belonged to you, too. We met in college. I was studying graphic design, lost in a world of color palettes and typography. He was a business major, crackling with an energy that felt like lightning in a bottle. He didn't just walk into a room. He took it over. He talked about the future not as some distant, hazy thing, but as a place he was already building, and he wanted me to come with him. For 5 years, that's exactly what we did. We lived in a tiny apartment where the sound of the upstairs neighbors was a constant soundtrack to our lives. We ate cheap takeout on the floor, using overturned boxes as a table. I worked a steady but uninspiring job at a marketing firm, designing logos for companies that sold things nobody needed. My salary paid our rent, our bills, our life. His went directly into his prototype fund. He was developing a new kind of logistics software. It was brilliant, I knew it was. I didn't understand the code, the algorithms, the complex market analysis he'd spend all night explaining to me, his eyes burning with passion. But I understood him. I understood the fierce, desperate hunger in him to create something, to build something that would last. I was his first believer, his only believer for a long time. I designed his first logo, his first pitch deck, the website that would eventually attract his first seed investors. My creativity was the skin he wrapped his brilliant bones in. We were a team. He was the engine, and I was the chassis, giving his ambition form and direction. We were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. Or so I believed. The world felt small, just the two of us against everyone else, fighting for this shared future that was so vivid in his mind it felt like a memory. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. I received a letter from an estate lawyer. My grandparents, the two most stable and loving people I had ever known, had passed away within months of each other. They weren't wealthy, not in the way Mark dreamed of. They were farmers. They saved every penny, lived simply, and left me everything they had. It wasn't a fortune, but to us, it was the world. $300,000. I remember sitting on our lumpy sofa, the letter trembling in my hand, the weight of their entire life's work condensed into a single number. Mark sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders. He was gentle and kind, and he mourned with me. For a week, he didn't mention the business once. He just held me, made me tea, and let me cry. Then, one evening, as we were washing dishes, he laid it all out. He had a meeting with a serious investor group, the kind that could turn his prototype into a real company. But he needed to show them he had skin in the game. He needed a significant capital investment to prove he was serious, to build out the final phase of the software before the presentation. He needed my inheritance. "Clara," he said, his voice soft, his hands holding mine. "This is it. This is the moment everything changes. It's not just my dream anymore. It's our dream. With that money, we don't just get a meeting, we get a seat at the table. We build our future. A house, kids, everything we've ever talked about. It's all right there, waiting for us." He wasn't pressuring me. He was inviting me. He was painting a picture of our life together, a life built on the foundation of his genius and my faith. I looked around our tiny apartment, at the peeling paint and the flickering fluorescent light in the kitchen. I thought about my dead-end job. I thought about my grandparents, who had worked their fingers to the bone their entire lives for that money, just so I could have a better one. They would have wanted me to be happy. They would have wanted me to build something. What if it fails? I whispered, the fear a tight knot in my stomach. He smiled, that brilliant, world-conquering smile of his. "It won't, because I have you. We can't fail." And I believed him. I believed him with every cell in my body. The next day, I called the lawyer. I told him to liquidate the assets. We met with Mark's corporate attorney, a man named Henderson with eyes like a shark. He slid a mountain of paperwork across the table. I was a designer, not a lawyer. The jargon was dense, intimidating. It's just standard procedure, Mark said, squeezing my hand under the table. Basically, it says you're an initial investor and you'll own a piece of the company. But something my grandfather always used to say echoed in my head. Never sign anything you don't understand, Clara. The devil is always in the fine print. I pointed to a section. What does this part mean? About shareholder classes. Henderson gave a dismissive wave of his hand. Just legal boilerplate. It separates voting shares from non-voting shares. Don't worry about it. But I did worry. I felt a prickle of unease. I want it changed, I said, my voice small but firm. I wanted to say that my investment gives me a controlling interest. A final say. Henderson actually laughed. A short, sharp, barking sound. That's not how this works, sweetheart. You're a passive investor. Mark looked embarrassed. Clara, honey, let's not hold things up. But I didn't back down. The memory of my grandfather's calloused hands, the smell of the earth on his clothes, it gave me a strength I didn't know I had. This is every penny my family ever saved. It's not passive to me. It's everything. I want it in writing. That my shares, our shares, hold the majority vote. I thought Mark would be angry. Instead, he looked at me with a strange expression, a mixture of exasperation and adoration. He turned to Henderson. Do it, he said. Give her whatever she wants. She's my partner. In everything. And so, Henderson, sighing dramatically, had his assistant type up a new clause. An amendment. He probably thought it was a joke, a way to appease the silly, emotional wife. He probably thought it would never matter. He explained it in condescendingly simple terms. As long as we were married, the votes were essentially pooled, with Mark as the acting CEO making the decisions. The clause would only really have independent teeth if, well, the implication was clear. If we weren't a team anymore. And that was unthinkable.
À ridicule, impossible scénario.
I signed the papers. I transferred the money. $300,000. My past, my present, and my future all signed over to his dream. For 2 years, it was magical. The investment worked. The company, which we named Apex, took off like a rocket. We moved out of the tiny apartment and into a sleek, minimalist house with glass walls and a view of the city. Mark was celebrated. He was in Forbes, Wired, the Wall Street Journal. He was the boy genius who had changed the face of logistics. And I was right there beside him, the proud, supportive wife. I quit my job to manage our home, to host the dinner parties for investors, to be the calm center in his whirlwind life. I was happy for him. I was happy for us. I didn't notice, at first, how us slowly became him, how the late-night conversations about our dreams became monologues about his quarterly reports, how we can't fail became, I can't fail. The team was dissolving, and I was being relegated to the sidelines, a cheerleader for a game I was no longer playing. The inciting incident, the moment the world I knew shattered, wasn't a dramatic, plate-smashing fight. It was quiet. It was civilized. It was utterly brutal. He came home late one Thursday. The house was filled with the smell of the roast chicken I'd made his favorite. He walked into the kitchen, didn't kiss me, and placed his briefcase on the counter with a soft click. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words. The 4 horsemen of a dying relationship. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Okay," I said, my hands suddenly cold. "Is everything all right with the company?" He wouldn't look at me. He stared at the stainless steel refrigerator as if it held the answers to the universe. "The company is fine, Clara. It's us." He told me he wasn't happy, that he hadn't been for a while, that he had grown and I hadn't. He said he needed something different. Someone different. He spoke in the sanitized, passionless language of a press release, as if he were announcing a corporate restructuring, not detonating our entire life. "Who is she?" I asked, the question a shard of glass in my throat. He finally looked at me then, and there was no love in his eyes. There was only pity. and impatience. Her name is Amelia. She's the COO of the company we're acquiring. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
The word was so small, so pathetic. It was a pebble thrown against the skyscraper of his betrayal.
He was leaving me.
He was leaving me for a woman who was his corporate equal, a woman who understood his new world of mergers and acquisitions, a world where I had no place. And the company? I whispered, my mind reeling. My money. He sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. Clara, please don't make this messy. You'll be taken care of. I'll buy you out. You'll get your initial investment back, plus a generous return. You'll be very comfortable. He was firing me from our marriage, from our life, from the company I had funded with the dirt from my grandfather's farm. He was patting me on the head and showing me the door, a golden parachute for the inconvenient first wife. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in the dark in our beautiful glass house, which suddenly felt like a fishbowl, and I felt the cold, hard reality of what I had done. I hadn't just invested my inheritance. I had invested my entire self. And he had just announced he was liquidating the asset. The first few weeks were a blur of shock and a deep, numbing pain that settled in my bones. He moved out the next day, packing his things with an efficiency that felt practiced. He was polite, distant, a stranger who just happened to have a key to my house. He left behind the life we had built as if he were shedding an old skin. The silence he left in his wake was deafening. Every room echoed with his absence, with the ghost of his laughter, with the phantom scent of his cologne. I tried to reason with him. I called him, my voice breaking, begging him to reconsider, to go to counseling, to remember the promises we made over cheap takeout on the floor of our first apartment. His replies were short, clipped, filled with corporate jargon. He talked about moving forward, optimizing for happiness, and realigning personal assets. He was treating our marriage like a failed business venture he was eager to write off. Then the letters started arriving. Thick cream envelopes from his lawyer, Henderson. The first one was a formal notice of his intent to file for divorce. The second was the buyout offer. It was exactly what he'd promised. My initial $300,000 plus $100,000 more. It was a generous return by any normal standard. But Apex was no longer a normal company. It was valued at over $50 million and was on the verge of a merger that would push its valuation into the hundreds of millions. My shares, the ones I had bought when the company was nothing but an idea in a dimly lit apartment, were worth at least $10 million. He was trying to buy my dream for pennies on the dollar. He was counting on me to be the heartbroken, naive wife who would be so grateful for the scraps from his table that I would sign anything just to make the pain go away. For a while, he was almost right. I felt powerless. I spent my days wandering through the empty glass house, a ghost in my own life. I'd see articles online about him and Amelia, the new power couple of the tech world. There were pictures of them at charity galas, on vacation in Tuscany, smiling for the cameras. He had seamlessly swapped me out of his life, replacing me with a newer, shinier model who better matched his new lifestyle. Each photo was a fresh stab to the heart. I was a footnote in his story, the humble beginning he was already trying to erase. My friends tried to help. They brought over wine and casseroles and told me I was better off without him. They told me to take the money and run, to start a new life, to forget him.
And I wanted to. God, I wanted to.
The thought of a long, drawn-out legal battle against the man I once loved, against his team of ruthless lawyers, was terrifying. It felt easier to just let go, to sign the papers and disappear. I hired a lawyer of my own, a kind, older woman named Eleanor who specialized in messy divorces. I sat in her plush office, surrounded by legal books, and told her everything, my voice thick with unshed tears. I told her about the beginning, about my inheritance, about the buyout offer. I felt pathetic, like a cliché. The discarded wife. Eleanor listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she looked at the offer from Henderson and snorted. A small, Sharp, unimpressed sound. "This is an insult," she said, tapping the paper with her pen. "He's banking on you being too emotional to see straight. Men like him always do. They mistake kindness for weakness." "But what can I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He has all the power.
He's the CEO.
It's his company." "Is it?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward, her eyes sharp. "You said you were an initial investor. Did you sign an agreement? A contract?" I nodded numbly. "Yes, but it was years ago. I barely remember what was in it." "Find it," she said, her voice firm. "Find that agreement, Clara. In every mountain of legal paperwork, there's always a pebble. We just need to find our pebble." That night, I tore the house apart. Mark had taken most of the business files, but our personal documents were still in a filing cabinet in the back of my closet. I dug through old tax returns, car titles, and appliance warranties until my fingers were gray with dust. And then I found it. A faded blue folder labeled Apex Initial Capital. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was the original investment agreement, the one we signed in Henderson's office all those years ago. I scanned through the dense pages, my heart sinking. It all seemed so official, so ironclad. It was full of clauses and subparagraphs that made my head spin. It felt hopeless. I was about to close the folder when a single, stapled page fell out. The amendment. The page Henderson's assistant had typed up while he rolled his eyes. The clause I had insisted on, the one born from a ghost of my grandfather's wisdom. I read the words, and this time, they didn't confuse me. They were a lifeline. The Class A shares held by Clara Vance, representing the initial capital investment of $300,000, shall constitute a majority voting block of 51% of all shareholder voting power. In the event of the dissolution of the marital partnership between Mark Vance and Clara Vance, this voting power becomes solely and independently executable by Clara Vance upon legal separation. The air left my lungs in a rush. I read it again. And again. The devil was in the fine print. But so, it turned out, was God. He didn't know. I was sure of it. Mark, in his arrogance, in his haste to get his hands on my money, had never bothered to truly read the concession he'd made to his emotional wife. Henderson had probably forgotten about it the second he'd filed it away. They had made the one mistake powerful men always make. They had underestimated me. I sat on the floor of my closet, the paper clutched in my hand, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt a flicker of something else. Something hot and sharp and dangerous. I felt anger. And then I felt hope. The pebble Eleanor had talked about wasn't a pebble. It was a boulder. And I was about to drop it on Mark's entire world. My first call was to Eleanor. I read her the clause over the phone. There was a long silence on the other end, and then she let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be," she said, a slow smile in her voice. "Clara, your husband didn't just give you a seat at the table. He gave you the whole damn table." "What does it mean?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What can I do?" "It means," she said, her tone shifting from surprise to strategic, "that we reject their insulting offer. It means we don't just ask for what you're owed. It means you are, for all intents and purposes, his boss. You have final say on any major corporate decision. Like, for instance, a merger." The revelation was so immense, so world-altering, that I couldn't fully process it. Me, his boss. The idea was absurd. I was the woman who organized his sock drawer and made sure the fridge was stocked with his favorite sparkling water. I was the quiet, supportive wife in the background of his success story. The thought of wielding this kind of power was dizzying, terrifying. "He'll fight it," I said, the fear creeping back in. "He'll say I tricked him." "Let him try," Eleanor said, her voice like steel. "He signed it. His own lawyer drafted it. It's a legally binding contract. He has no recourse. The question is, Clara, what do you want to do with it?" That was the question that haunted me for the next week. What did I want? Part of me, the old me, wanted to use it as leverage. Force him to give me a fair settlement, the $10 million I was owed. and then walk away, disappear from his life forever. It was the safe path, the quiet path. But every time I saw his face online, smiling next to Amelia, every time I remembered his cold, dismissive words as he dismantled our life, the anger burned a little hotter. He hadn't just left me. He had tried to erase me. He had tried to steal my contribution, my faith, my family's legacy, and pay me off like a disgruntled employee. A fair settlement felt like letting him get away with it. It felt like letting him win. The shift inside me was gradual, then sudden. Grief is a strange thing. For months, it had been a heavy, suffocating blanket. But slowly, it began to burn away, leaving behind something harder, something more focused. It was like my heart was being forged into a weapon. The naive, trusting girl who had signed that contract was gone. In her place was a woman who was finally ready to fight for what was hers. I called Eleanor back. "I don't want a settlement," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I want to stop the merger." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "That's a bold move, Clara. That's a declaration of war. You understand that, right? He won't just be angry. He'll be vindictive. He'll come after you, with everything he has." "Let him," I said. "He built this company with my money. I'm not letting him sell it out from under me to fund his new life with his new girlfriend." The war began with a single letter. Eleanor sent a crisp, formal rejection of their buyout offer to Henderson, along with a polite reminder of Section 4, subparagraph B. The fallout was immediate. My phone rang less than an hour later. It was Mark, not his lawyer. Him. It was the first time he'd called me directly in months. I let it ring 4 times, my hand hovering over the screen, before I answered. "What the hell is this, Clara?" he snarled, his voice stripped of all its usual charm. There was no honey, no condescension, just pure, undiluted rage. "It's a rejection of your offer, Mark," I said, pleased with how calm I sounded. "Don't play dumb with me. This ridiculous clause about you being a majority shareholder. What kind of game are you playing?" "It's not a game," I replied. "It's the contract you signed. The one you were in such a hurry to get past, so you could have my inheritance." There was a choked, sputtering sound on the other end. "You think you can stop this? You think you can waltz in and destroy everything I've built?" "Everything we built," I corrected him softly. "And I'm not destroying it. I'm protecting it." "From what?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "From $100 million valuation? From success? You're being a bitter, vindictive shrew." "No," I said, and the coldness in my own voice surprised me. "I'm being a good business partner. And as the majority shareholder, I don't believe this merger is in the company's best interest at this time." I hung up before he could respond. My hand was trembling, my heart was racing, but I had done it. I had stood up to him. I had drawn the battle line. His next move was to send Henderson after me. The legal threats escalated. They tried to invalidate the clause, claiming I had exerted undue emotional influence when it was drafted. They claimed I was mentally incompetent to make decisions for the company. They tried to bury Eleanor in paperwork, filing motion after motion, hoping to drain my resources and my resolve. It was a nightmare. Every day brought a new legal threat, a new attack on my character. Mark started leaking stories to the press. Not directly, he was too smart for that. But anonymous sources started telling tech bloggers about the unstable ex-wife who was trying to sabotage Apex out of spite. I was painted as a gold digger, a woman scorned, a hysterical mess who couldn't accept that her husband had moved on. My face, a candid photo taken on a bad day, appeared next to headlines that read, "Bitter ex-wife holds tech giant hostage, my friends called, worried." Some of them, the ones who moved in Mark's new, glittering social circle, stopped calling altogether. I was becoming a pariah. The pressure was immense. There were days I would just curl up in bed and cry, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I felt alone, completely and utterly alone, fighting a war against a man who was using the media as his personal air force. This was his strategy, to isolate me, to discredit me, to break me down until I was so exhausted and so vilified that I would have no choice but to surrender and take whatever scrap he threw my way. He was poisoning the well, turning the entire world against me. He knew my weaknesses. He knew I hated conflict, that I cared what people thought of me. He was using my own personality as a weapon against me. The deepest crisis, my lowest point, came during a deposition. It was a sterile, soulless room. Me and Eleanor on one side of a long table, Mark, Henderson, and a team of 3 other lawyers on the other.
For 6 hours, they interrogated me.
They weren't asking about the contract. They were asking about my marriage. Henderson, his shark eyes gleaming, led the attack. He asked about fights Mark and I had years ago. He twisted my words, painting me as jealous, controlling, emotionally volatile. He brought up a time I'd been in therapy for anxiety after my mother was sick. "So, you have a history of emotional instability, Ms. Vance?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Mark just sat there, staring at his hands, never once looking at me. He let his lawyer tear me to pieces, dissect our private life, and use my moments of vulnerability as evidence against me. He was allowing this to happen.
He was sanctioning it.
That was the moment the last vestiges of my love for him died. It wasn't just that he had left me or cheated on me. It was that he was willing to destroy me, to burn down the entire memory of us, just to win. The man I had loved, the boy with the dreams in the tiny apartment, was well and truly gone. In his place was a monster. I left that deposition feeling hollowed out, violated. I went home and sat in the dark, the insults and accusations echoing in my head. He was going to win. He had more money, more power, more resources. He would drag this out for years, bleeding me dry emotionally and financially until I had nothing left. The thought of giving up, of just signing the papers and letting him have his victory, was a siren song. It promised peace. It promised an end to the pain. I was so close to doing it. I picked up the phone to call Eleanor, to tell her to accept the last offer they'd sent, a paltry $2 million, just to make it all stop. My finger hovered over her name in my contacts. And then, my eyes landed on a framed photo on my bedside table. It was the only one I hadn't put away. It was of my grandparents, standing in front of their small farmhouse. They were old, their faces a roadmap of wrinkles from years of hard work and laughter. They were holding hands. They had built their life from nothing, with their own 2 hands, on a foundation of love, trust, and resilience. The money they left me wasn't just money. It was the physical manifestation of their life's work. It was their legacy. And I had given it to a man who was now using it to obliterate me. Something in me snapped. Not in a breaking way, but in a clicking into place way. The exhaustion, the fear, the humiliation, it all coalesced into a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. I was not going to let him win. I was not going to let him tarnish my grandparents' memory. I was not going to let him erase me. He had started this war, but I was going to finish it. I put the phone down. I walked to my desk and turned on my computer. I opened a new file. I had been his partner. I knew the company's weaknesses. I knew its strengths. And most importantly, I knew his arrogance, his impatience, his absolute, blind certainty that he was the smartest person in any room. He thought he was playing chess, but he had forgotten who owned the board. I called Eleanor back, but the words I said were different. "He wants a war, Eleanor," I said, my voice devoid of any tremor.
"Fine.
Let's give him one." "When is the final board meeting for the merger?" 2 weeks, she said.
"Why?"
"Because," I said, looking at my reflection in the dark computer screen, a stranger with cold, determined eyes staring back at me. "I'm going to attend." The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my life. I didn't just sit back and wait. I became a strategist. Eleanor and I worked day and night, not on a defense, but on an offense. We hired a forensic accountant to go through Apex's books, the ones I legally had a right to see as a shareholder. I spent hours on the phone with him, pointing him to the obscure projects and experimental ventures Mark had started, the ones he was always so proud of. I knew where he hid his vanity projects, the little drains on capital that he wrote off as research and development. Meanwhile, Eleanor was doing her own digging. She researched every single member of the board. Their investments, their histories, their loyalties. We needed to understand the room we were walking into. We discovered that 2 of them had been secretly skeptical of the merger, worried that Mark was giving away too much of the company's core technology to the larger conglomerate that was acquiring them. But Mark's charisma and the promise of a massive payday had kept them silent. They were our potential allies. The final piece of the puzzle, the plot twist that would turn my move from a simple roadblock into a complete catastrophe for Mark, came from the forensic accountant. He called me late one night, his voice electric with excitement.
"I've found it," he said.
"It's buried deep in the financing for the acquisition, but it's crystal clear. Your husband took out a massive bridge loan to cover preliminary acquisition costs and to pay out executive bonuses before the deal was finalized." "I don't understand," I said. "What does that mean?" "It means he was so sure this deal was going through that he spent the money before he had it. The loan is personally guaranteed by him and collateralized against his own shares in Apex. But there's a covenant in the loan agreement. A material adverse change clause. It says if any event occurs that could reasonably jeopardize the merger, the bank can call in the entire loan immediately." I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. And a majority shareholder voting against the merger. Would that count? "Count," the accountant laughed. "That's the definition of a material adverse change. If you block that vote, Clara, the bank will call his loan. He'll have to pay back $20 million, probably within 30 days. And since all his assets are tied up in Apex stock that will be plummeting in value once news of the failed merger gets out, he'll be ruined."
Personally.
Utterly. This was it. This was the masterstroke. It wasn't just about stopping the merger anymore. It was about showing him, and everyone else, that the foundations of his entire glittering empire were built on sand, held together only by my signature. His arrogance, his belief in his own invincibility, had led him to bet his entire personal fortune on the assumption that I would do nothing. He had pointed the gun at his own head. All I had to do was pull the trigger. The night before the board meeting, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the glass house, a place that had once been my prison, and I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't the woman who had cried in these rooms anymore. I had been forged in the fire of his betrayal, and I had come out the other side as something new, something stronger. I thought about what I was about to do. I wasn't just taking back my company or my money. I was taking back my story. He had tried to write me out of it, to reduce me to a bitter footnote. But tomorrow, I was going to write the final chapter. And he wasn't going to like the ending. I picked out my outfit with care. Not a power suit. Not something designed to intimidate. I chose a simple, elegant gray dress. The kind of thing I would have worn to one of his company dinners back when I was just the wife. I wanted to look like myself. I wanted him to see the woman he had discarded, right before she took everything from him. Walking into that building was like walking into the heart of the enemy's territory. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and steel, with the Apex logo, the one I designed on my laptop in our tiny apartment, emblazoned on the marble wall. Everyone I passed, from the security guard to the executives in the elevator, looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. They had all read the stories. I was the crazy ex-wife. When I walked into the boardroom, the chatter immediately died. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me. Mark was at the head of the table, looking impossibly handsome and confident. He saw me, and his face tightened for a fraction of a second before settling into a mask of weary condescension. Amelia was there, sitting to his right, looking sleek and severe in a black dress. She gave me a look of such triumphant disdain, it was almost comical. She thought she had won. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the one they had grudgingly set for the disruptive shareholder. I said nothing. I just opened my purse and took out a single folder. Mark began his presentation. He was brilliant, I had to give him that. He was charming, articulate, and passionate. He painted a glorious picture of the future, a future of synergy and market domination. The board members were captivated, nodding along, their eyes gleaming with greed. He was selling them a dream, just like he had once sold one to me. As he spoke, he kept flicking his eyes toward me, a little smirk playing on his lips. He thought my presence was a pathetic, last-ditch effort to rattle him. He had no idea. He was a dead man walking, delivering his own eulogy. When he finished, the room broke into applause. Mr. Sterling, the venture capitalist, beamed at him.
À tour de force, Marc.
Truly. Now, I believe we're all ready to vote on the final approval of the merger. This was my moment. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I cleared my throat. It was a small sound, but in the expectant silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Before you vote, I said, my voice even, there's something you all need to see. And that's when we returned to the beginning, to the moment where I laid it all out. Mark stands at the head of the table, frozen. The blood has drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, gray pallor. His eyes are locked on mine, wide with a dawning, catastrophic understanding. He's rereading the clause, the words he ignored years ago, but they aren't making any more sense to him now. They can't be real. This is a joke, he chokes out, his voice a hoarse whisper. He looks at Henderson, his lawyer, his shark, for reassurance. But Henderson is ashen. Henderson knows. He knows the document is real. He knows he's the one who filed it. Clara, Mark pleads, and for the first time in a year, I hear a crack in his perfect facade. I hear the boy from the apartment, the one who was scared of failing. Clara, you can't do this. I can, I say simply. And I am. As the majority shareholder of Apex, I do not consent to this merger. The deal is off. Amelia, his perfect corporate partner, lets out a strangled gasp. This is insane. She can't do this. Can she? Her sharp, commanding voice is now thin and shrill. She looks around the table for support, but finds none. The board members are in chaos. They're muttering to each other, staring at me, at Mark, at the useless voting papers in front of them. The glorious future Mark painted for them has just evaporated. Their massive paydays have vanished into thin air. Mr. Sterling is pale, his mouth hanging open. He looks at me not with contempt, but with a dawning, horrified respect. But why? Mark asks, his voice breaking. Why would you destroy the company? Our company. And that's when I slide the second folder across the table. The one from the forensic accountant. I'm not destroying it, I say, my voice cold and clear, cutting through the noise. I'm saving it. From a CEO who is so confident in his own brilliance that he took out a $20 million bridge loan against the company's success, a loan that is personally guaranteed by him. A loan, I'm sure the bank will be interested to learn, that now has its material adverse change clause activated. Mark physically recoils as if I'd slapped him. He understands now. He sees the whole picture, the beautiful, intricate trap he built for himself. I didn't just kill the merger. I just bankrupted him.
Personally.
I just took his fortune, his reputation, and his future, and incinerated them with a single sentence. He stares at me, his chest heaving. His mouth opens and closes like a fish gasping for air. He's looking at me, but I know what he's seeing. He's seeing the late nights, the cheap takeout, the woman who believed in him when no one else did. He's seeing the foundation he's so carelessly dynamited. And he's realizing far too late that the whole house was about to come down on top of him. Clara, he whispers one last time, his hand fluttering to his chest. And then he collapses. The aftermath is not triumphant. It's quiet. The paramedics came and took Mark away. The board members, after a flurry of panicked, whispered conversations, scurried away like rats from a sinking ship, leaving me alone in the silent, cavernous room. I didn't stay to watch. I just picked up my purse, left the folders on the table, and walked out. I walked out of the building, past the marble logo I designed, and into the afternoon sun. The city air had never smelled so clean. In the days that followed, my phone rang off the hook. It was Mr. Sterling. It was the other board members. It was lawyers from the company we were supposed to merge with, threatening lawsuits. It was even Amelia who left a tearful, screaming voicemail that was equal parts threat and plea. I didn't answer any of them. I let Eleanor handle it. She called me a week later. The news was what we expected. The bank had called Mark's loan. He was forced to liquidate his shares at a fraction of their previous value to cover the debt. He was wiped out. The board, in a panic, had voted to remove him as CEO. They had offered me the position. Interim CEO. Chairman of the board. Whatever I wanted. The keys to the kingdom were mine. I thought about it for a long time. I could have run Apex. I could have stepped into his shoes and become the titan of industry he always wanted to be.
Part of me was tempted.
It would have been the ultimate victory. But when I really looked deep inside myself, I realized I didn't want his dream anymore. I had spent so many years supporting his ambition that I had forgotten I had any of my own. I didn't want to live in a glass house, surrounded by sharks and expensive suits. I wanted a garden. I wanted to paint. I wanted a life that was quiet and real and mine. So I made my final move. With Eleanor's guidance, I negotiated the sale of my shares. Not to a big conglomerate in a hostile takeover, but to the employees of Apex. I structured a deal that allowed them to buy my controlling interest over time, turning the company they had helped build into one they owned. I kept a small, silent percentage for myself. A nest egg. A reminder. The last time I saw Mark was 6 months later. I was in a small coffee shop downtown sketching in a notebook when he walked in. He looked diminished. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a worn jacket. The arrogant swagger was gone. He looked tired. He saw me, and for a moment, I thought he would turn and walk away. But he didn't. He walked over to my table. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "Mark," I replied, not looking up from my sketch. I heard what you did. With the company. Selling it to the employees. That was a good thing to do." "It was the right thing to do," I said. We stood there in silence for a long moment. The space between us was filled with the ghosts of everything we had been and everything we had destroyed. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered. And for the first time, I thought he might actually mean it. Not sorry for leaving me, not sorry for Amelia, but sorry for the person he had become. Sorry for underestimating the woman who had loved him. I finally looked up at him. I saw the regret in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough to rebuild the world he had burned down. "I know," I said. And then I went back to my drawing. He stood there for another minute, then turned and walked out of the coffee shop, out of my life forever. I don't live in the glass house anymore. I sold it and bought a small cottage with a sprawling, overgrown garden. I spend my days painting, getting my hands dirty in the soil, building a life that is small and quiet and entirely my own. I am not a titan of industry. I am not on the cover of any magazines. But I am free, and some victories aren't loud. They're the quiet peace that comes after the war is over. They're the color of the sunset on your own front porch. They're the sure and certain knowledge that you saved yourself. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. The world can feel lonely, but our stories connect us. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life, and I'm grateful you're here to share this space with me.